ABC News, World News Sunday. From New York, here's Diane Sawyer.
Good evening. Saddam Hussein decided to make his presence felt today, as evidenced in two major stories from the Gulf tonight. In Saudi Arabia, in the capital of Riyadh and in the eastern city of Dhahran, it has been a night of sirens and racing to the air raid shelters. Iraq has fired off 3 Scud missiles at Dhahran. U.S. interceptor missiles streaked into the sky to shoot them down. Then later, more of those improved Scud missiles streaked in on Dhahran and Riyadh. Again, Patriots were launched to intercept them. At the same time, 600 miles away in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, Americans are being held prisoner. Iraqi television paraded 7 men in front of the cameras today. Iraq claims all 7 are captured flyers. 3 of them are American. We begin with the missile attack on Saudi Arabia and ABC's Forrest Sawyer, who is there.
Bright dots in the night sky, streams of U.S. Patriot missiles chasing Iraqi Scuds. In Dhahran, it has been a night of air raid alerts, driving local residents and journalists into shelters, where they huddled with gas masks and chemical suits. This has been the toughest test the Patriots have had to face so far. Earlier in the day, at the Kuwaiti border, Marine Harrier jets dropped flares to confuse surface-to-air missiles, and then moved in to bomb Iraqi positions. Coalition aircraft have flown over 7,000 sorties in 72 hours. Despite hazy weather, they have broken communication and supply lines, struck airfields and air defenses, as well as Saddam's elite Republican Guard. Allied Forces Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf told This Week with David Brinkley, Iraq's most dangerous weapons may be destroyed as well.
We've gone after his nuclear capability, his chemical capability, and his biological capability. And I don't know where it was before this started, but I can assure you that it's had a considerable setback, if not a total setback, by this point in the game.
Saddam is slowly losing ground. The U.S. battle plan is right on schedule.
I think the campaign is unfolding just about as we had expected, except for the very nice surprise that we haven't taken very many casualties.
I'd say we're looking at some of the most formidable air defenses ever encountered. They have terrific air-to-ground or air-to-air assets, both in their anti-aircraft artillery and their SAMs. We're neutralizing those.
On the ground, U.S. troops and supplies continued their drive to the Kuwaiti border, while to the south, 2 more American servicemen were killed when their bunker collapsed. And the war's first Purple Heart was awarded to a Navy medic, wounded by shrapnel from Iraqi artillery fire.
Here we go. Let's go. Up we go.
A few of the American civilians in eastern Saudi Arabia took up the U.S. government's offer to fly them out of the country. 3 flights were scheduled tonight, 181 people. U.S. officials say these flights do not signify a heightened state of alert, nor are they recommending that anyone leave the region. But with all commercial flights canceled here, this is the way out of the war zone.
Come here, you.
Only about 600 have said they may want to leave. Around 6,500 plan to stay.
I think the hard thing for families in the States to appreciate is that this is home. And so we have different feelings about this place than they can really identify with.
Now, you may have noticed at the beginning of this report an apparent hit by one of the Patriots and some falling debris. Now, nothing at all has been confirmed, but there is some concern that that debris may have caused some injuries, and that is certainly being investigated now.
All right, Forrest, as we said earlier, a companion city in uncertainty and fear today was the capital city of Riyadh. We're going to go now to Barry Dunsmore, who is standing by there. What was it like in Riyadh today, Barry?
Well, I've had better days, let's put it that way, Diane. This is, as you point out, it is the capital of this country. It is also the center of the Central Command. It's where the war is being planned and executed. But this evening, 6 Scud missiles, according to the Joint Information Bureau, were fired upon this city. Some of us went into bomb shelters, but ABC cameraman Rick Hull was on the roof of our hotel shooting some of this very spectacular footage. This really represents the kinds of things that are going on in this particular war. The now famous Patriot missile going on to challenge the Iraqi Scud missiles. And as I say, according to the Information Bureau here, all 6 incoming missiles were engaged, and it is believed that they were all destroyed, although there are some people who feel that at least one of the missiles may actually have landed around Riyadh. Perhaps the most significant thing, of course, is that as far as we know, there was no poison gas or chemical weapons connected with these warheads.
You're saying, Barry, that they have no evidence of chemical weapons, or they don't have a way of determining at this point?
I guess what I'm really saying is they haven't told us yet, Diane.
All right.
Clearly, the fact is that this is a war where the psychological aspect is very, very important, and there's no question that the possibility that any one of these Scud missiles might be carrying chemicals or poison gas or nerve gas is something that is indeed very unnerving, especially to a civilian population, which until today was never really sure or was very skeptical that the Iraqis would ever be able to send missiles this close to the capital, in fact, right to the capital.
Of course, the officers there have warned all along not to be overconfident that this could happen. Nevertheless, were they surprised?
I don't know if people were surprised or not. I think, generally speaking, everyone has thought that Saddam Hussein probably would have something up his sleeve, and he's actually making very big points in this part of the world by being able to attack Tel Aviv and now the capital of Saudi Arabia.
All right, Barry Dunsmore in Riyadh. Let's go now to Tony Cordesman, our military analyst. Mr. Cordesman, we can imagine the psychological advantages for Saddam Hussein of this barrage today. Are there strategic advantages as well?
Diane, if we look at the coverage of these missiles, particularly the improved versions of them, they can cover virtually the entire area. That means that they can force our forces and those of the other members of the coalition to be constantly ready. They can drive them into suits, into chemical protection at any time. And the great uncertainty is there are three types of missiles here, two of which may have chemical warheads. No one can ever be sure at any time whether they will use a chemical or a conventional warhead. What is worse is the weather is poor over the region, and they could launch from an area of approximately 10,000 square miles. No one can be certain how many launchers they actually produced, in addition to the ones they had from the Soviet Union, and that creates a horrifying shell game that may go on virtually to the end of the war.
We have heard a lot about the debris falling from the Patriot missile interceptions and that some injuries, in fact, may be caused by it. What kind of debris is it? What quantity are we talking about?
Well, it would be relatively small debris. It would be a matter of sheer coincidence if one produced any serious damage. It did look like that from that tape, one missile did get through an impact on the ground, but of course, no one is really ready to tell.
All right, Tony Cordesman, our thanks to you. Other news from the Gulf. 3 more American planes were shot down today. That brings to 15 the total number of planes the coalition forces have lost. 9 of them are American. A third British Tornado fighter bomber was shot down today. Italy, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia have lost 1 plane each. The Pentagon lists 1 American as killed in action. 12 airmen are listed as missing, and they include the 3 that Iraq claims to have captured. The Iraqi government has released audio tape of what it claims are interviews with those pilots. They are identified as Guy Hunter, Lieutenant Jeffrey Zahn, and Lieutenant Colonel Clifford M. Acree. ABC News is not going to air that tape this evening, and we thought we should tell you why. We have had a lot of experience with statements made by people who are being held against their will, including hostages in Lebanon. And we want to be especially careful because the words they use are often not their own. They are often forced to read statements under threat of their lives. So keeping that in mind, here is ABC's Gary Shepard, who has been monitoring the situation from Jordan's capital, Amman.
Iraqi television tonight broadcast pictures of 7 Allied airmen who it claimed were shot down over Iraq and Kuwait. The official government newscast, which was not available here in Jordan, said 3 of the prisoners were Americans. One was identified as a U.S. Navy lieutenant from the aircraft carrier Saratoga. In remarks reminiscent of pilot interviews from Hanoi during the Vietnam War, he was quoted as saying, "I think our leaders have wrongly attacked the peaceful Iraqis." Saddam Hussein, in a radio address to his nation, continued to claim that victory is certain. He said Iraq has used only a fraction of its military arsenal. He threatened to use all kinds of weapons against the Allied forces. This weekend, there have been intense Allied air attacks on Baghdad, causing more serious damage to key installations. This petrochemical plant was hit with several bombs and appeared to have been virtually destroyed. The raids were also conducted during daylight hours. Among the targets, this major power plant, 5 miles from the downtown district. It sustained 2 direct hits, further crippling the capital's ability to provide electricity. This key communications tower was damaged but still standing on Friday. By Saturday, after being hit by a cruise missile, it was gone. Living conditions in Baghdad are getting more and more desperate. People are crowding into shelters. There is little water. Stores are closed and food is running out. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Amman, Jordan.
Over and over today, military briefing officers were asked, what's next? How long will the air war go on? Will there be a ground war? And when will it start? And over, the military briefers refused to answer. ABC's Bob Zelnick on part of the reason why.
Military sources say the next 3 to 4 days of the air campaign against Republican Guard forces may well determine whether the war can be won without a difficult and costly ground war. The minimum goal of the operation is to isolate the Republican Guards, cutting off their supplies and preventing them from reinforcing frontline Iraqi troops in Kuwait. The maximum goal is to break their morale, destroy large units, and take them out of the war. Sources here say the effort includes heavy bombing by F-15 Eagles against command and control facilities protected by concrete bunkers. Success here would in effect decapitate the troops in the field. Iraqi tanks are being hunted down by A-10 Warthogs using Maverick missiles and F-16 fighters using both the Maverick and Rockeye cluster bombs. Without armor, the Guards pose little threat. B-52s perform area carpet bombing against troop and supply concentrations as well as refueling centers. In addition to physical damage, analysts here say the B-52s strike terror into troops with their fearsome explosions. The Apache helicopter is being used to take out air defense communication sites further west. Air supremacy remains a key U.S. objective. For the same reason, F-4 Wild Weasels are moving against anti-aircraft radars. And efforts are being made to make the Iraqis ready their artillery to fire, at which point they can be targeted by the U.S. multiple launch rocket system. Artillery remains Iraq's most potent threat, with the potential to deliver chemical weapons. Officials here insist that despite the intensity of the U.S. attack, their assumption thus far is that the Republican Guards are well dug in and able to fight. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
Coming up, Israel breathing just a bit easier today. And the largest Arab American community in the nation, worried about neighbors and relatives in Iraq. And seeking answers and reassurance on the 4th day of the war.
And at least one government minister had his along as he emerged from today's cabinet meeting. The feeling is that it will be needed again.
I have no doubt that we will be attacked again.
Saddam Hussein is hitting us because he can't hit New York. We replaced New York for that purpose.
Palestinians, too, were buying supplies for a potential siege, and yet some were exulting about Saddam Hussein.
Very happy, and we think that Saddam will destroy Israel.
The Israelis have yet to retaliate for the attacks by Iraq last week. New American-made Patriot missile interceptors just delivered here are supposed to counter future attacks. Today, Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger saw some of the Patriot sites. He thanked the Israelis for delaying their response to the Scud attacks, and sources said that in exchange, the U.S. offered to let the Israelis keep the Patriots, to give Israel better deals on future U.S. military purchases, to improve intelligence sharing, and to not push for an international peace conference on the Palestinian question, which the Israelis oppose.
Sources say the fact that no Israelis have been killed in these attacks has made it easier for the government here to hold back. But if that changes, the pressure to respond will undoubtedly increase. Diane?
Thank you, Dean Reynolds in Israel. Coming up, the largest Arab American community in the nation worried about neighbors and relatives back home.
Everybody needs some money.
Americans went to church in unusually large numbers today, perhaps to ease their tensions about the hostilities overseas, perhaps to pray for peace. As ABC's Jack Smith has discovered, what they heard in church today mirrored the concerns of the country at large and the divided views of Desert Storm.
With their troops at war, Americans today turned to God. And across the country, churches rang with the sounds of patriotism. They sang God Bless America in Houston, and in St. Louis, the national anthem. In California, an American flag was hoisted at Garden Grove's Crystal Cathedral. And in Marietta, Georgia, worshipers heard an Army colonel back from the Gulf urge support for the troops.
It's going to get kind of rough, I think, in the next couple of weeks.
In Atlanta, Georgia, another point of view.
Fix Bush, fix Hussein talk. God, step in and resolve this conflict.
And in New York's St. Patrick's Cathedral, John Cardinal O'Connor preached against the war.
We must repeat over and over that peace does not come from the barrel of a gun.
Scenes across America from this, the nation's first Sunday at war in nearly 20 years. Jack Smith, ABC News, Washington.
And once again, these are the latest developments in the Gulf War. Iraq fired Scud missiles today at Saudi Arabia, 5 at the enormous air base in Dhahran and 6 at the capital, Riyadh. First reports say U.S. Patriot interceptor missiles are reported to have shot them all down. And Iraqi television showed pictures of 7 men it claimed were captured flyers, including 3 it identified as Americans. That's our report on World News Sunday. We'll continue with our updates every hour and, of course, be here for any major developments as they happen. I'm Diane Sawyer. Good night.
ABC News continues to monitor the war in the Persian Gulf 24 hours a day and will bring you developments as they occur. Stay with ABC News for complete coverage of the Persian Gulf crisis. From New York, this has been World News Sunday.
A presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other